Now we'll take a look at the bolt template that is used to help identify various fasteners. There's a lot of information on the bolt template, starting by the diameter. You can see here that there's a set of metric sized holes that you can fit to the fastener that you have, and there's also English sizes. There's then a rule to measure the length of a bolt. So for example, here you can place the shoulder on the corner here and measure the bolt if it's an English bolt, in this case 1.5 inches, or a metric, in this case a 25 millimeter length. So you can measure the diameter and the length using the main portion of the template here. In addition, there's information across the bottom here for English and metric threads, for your coarse thread and fine thread, for the number of threads per inch that are measured, or the thread pitch if you're working with the metric. Along the outside then, there are studs that you can fit a nut, for example here, to identify both the diameter of the nut as well as coarse versus fine thread. A fine thread would fit over the shoulder all the way to the main body of the template, whereas a coarse thread fits to the shoulder, as seen here. Then on the back of the gauge, there's a guide to measure your threads. You can see here that this would be your English threads or metric threads. And in this case, you would just take your bolt and align it with the thread pitch to identify which one is the appropriate fit, keeping in mind that the measurement is located below the thread. Now we're going to take a look at fasteners and understand some of the markings to help identify either the grade or the metric class for the strength of the hardware. Here you can see on the head of the bolts the notches that are indicated here. Those markings are identification of English hardware. In the case of the number of hatch marks to the strength grade of the hardware, we would take the number of hatches plus 2. So for example here we have 3 markings which would indicate a grade 5. And in this case we have 6 hatch marks indicating 6 plus 2 as a grade 8. Metric hardware is identified as a strength class versus a grade. Here you can see an 8.8, which would be a class 8 strength. Here's a 10.9, which would be a class 10. And a 12.9, which would be a class 12. Similar to the hardware, or bolts, the same type of markings would be identified on the nuts to make sure that the nut and the bolt are of the same grade. On these two particular nuts, you can see again a hatch mark on it. In the case here on the left, the 2 notches are side by side or adjacent to one another. That's an indication of a grade 8. The one with the spacing between the 2 notches would be an indication of a grade 5. And one without any notches would be a grade 2. Metric nuts would then have the stamping with the number of the metric strength class. And in both of these examples, you can see an 8 stamped on the nut, indicating that it's a metric strength class 8. Now we're going to do an example of actually identifying the size and class of a bolt. In this case, we can look at the head and see that there's 6 notches, indicating a grade 8. That also indicates that we're going to be measuring using the English side. If we check the diameter, we can see that it measures a 5/16 diameter. Then if we look at the bottom chart down here, we can see that our 5/16 is either going to be 18 threads per inch for a coarse thread or 24 threads per inch for a fine thread. Flipping the tool over, we're then going to fit it up to the various thread gauges to find out which size fits. And in this case, we identify it as the 18 threads per inch. So in this case, we have a grade 8, 5/16 diameter, coarse thread bolt that has a length of 1 1/4 inches, as identified here.